friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Kristen. She is originally from Florida. She spent 6 years teaching there. She taught middle school, high school, special education, gifted English, and we're going to learn all about her journey in education. And we're really going to learn about a really difficult year that she had in her third year of teaching. But before we go there, I'm just curious, what were your first 2 years of teaching like, and what subject did you teach for the first 2 years?
So the first 2 years of teaching, I was a special education teacher. This was at the high school level. So I taught students that were in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, but also were FAPE students, so up to age 22. Every student in my class had either a severe intellectual disability or a severe intellectual disability and a severe physical disability. At least the setup in my county for that was pretty much you got one teacher and they teach all of the classes that those students need to, to graduate or to get the job training that they need if they're already graduated but in the FAPE program. So like looking at my attendance roster is pretty hilarious. Because each period I'd be, teaching like 5 different courses technically, but it was just a technicality because, they have to say, okay, if you're 1 year after graduation, then you're doing, adult skills 1, and then next year's 2. But of course I could combine the curriculum a little bit more than teaching 5 separate things.
Wow.
But yeah, I taught everything. That
sounds stressful. Was that really stressful?
Well, maybe it's thanks to the people I had around me. That wasn't particularly stressful. The teachers I worked with, and actually almost all the teachers I've worked with at the 3 schools I taught at were generous, kind, resourceful people who are willing to share like their approaches to things and things that they'd done. So I made a good friend who is a fellow teacher in a very similar position to me, especially like that first year. If I was like, I have no idea how I can best talk about, why gravity causes the moon to orbit us, to these students who don't read, don't write, don't speak. But, my friend who had more experience than me was like, well, I did this last year. Here, take a look at this PowerPoint. Oh, you can talk about, you use this movie. There's this little activity you can do that like meets that standard, this standard. So it really wasn't too bad. And I also appreciated it because even though it wasn't going into like the intellectual depth that I, of course, as a person enjoy, I still got to think about and work with like so many different topics. So it's again a continuation of this thing of like I'm not like dedicated to one thing. I get to kind of play around with a bunch of different things. So I enjoyed it, really.
Cool. So what was behavior like in that context? And they were older students too, so was that ever a little bit scary?
Well, yes, but I think the biggest behavior issues in that environment versus like a general ed classroom are just so entirely like different in terms of what actually happens for one, but also for 2, like what the motivations are, how much of it can be controlled or excused at a certain time in a certain place. But one of the big benefits I think to that position, and something I wish was present more in the general ed environment, is that there was always a lot of other adults and staff around you to either work with you to help diffuse things, keep you safe, you can help keep them safe. It also helps students. If a student's really frustrated, you can trade out that person. Sometimes that's enough to kind of get them to start de-escalating. And I mean, that's the case with general ed kids too. But there was always, me and 2 to 3 aides. There was a behavior specialist dedicated to our unit who was pretty reliably available if things weren't going so well at that moment in time. There's not a lot of times where I felt like particularly unsafe. When someone was out, obviously things had a bigger chance of going wrong because not a lot of people were willing to substitute in my room. In fact, it would happen a lot that in the morning, there'd be a new face and be like, oh, I'm here to sub for, Mr. Corey or whatever. I'm like, okay, cool. And we'd be in the cafeteria with the kids and the poor sub would be kind of looking around and a little worried, walk into my classroom. And I think it happened like 2 or 3 times over the two years, walk straight back out. I'm like, well, I guess that was it. And I'm not saying like at that moment, it's not that the kids were being bad. I think it was just very overwhelming because not a lot of people are used to being around people with that high level of needs, especially when they're young, it seems. What I'm trying to say is most of the time it was okay. But occasionally when a staff member that I relied on and trusted and knew the routine was out, things could go a little bit worse. I had one student who was nonverbal, didn't have an effective way of communicating. So was often very frustrated and very frustrated with the expectations we place on him. I'm not saying those were too high or anything. I just mean it was a very specific case. And I had to walk him to the bus one day. So we get started doing that a little bit before they let out the bell because it takes quite a while. And I was walking with him and we walked past a vending machine. And I guess according to his parents, like, you know, if they're in public with him, he sees a vending machine, he's going to get a candy bar or whatever. But, you know, I don't have money in my pocket available for for that. And there's no candy bar in that vending machine anyway. It's just like weird school approved Gatorade or whatever. And so I'm like, you know, come on, we need to keep moving to your bus because your bus is going to be here waiting for you. And he did not like that. And I had to like gently, we had to like lock arms with him because otherwise he would wander away. I'm not in any restrictive way, but walk with him like arm in arm. And as he's getting more frustrated, he's wanting to go a separate way, like an entirely different way, which I'm like, darn, like as one person, like I definitely, if he gets away from me, I can't really do much besides, I don't even know, like, because the administration is going to be like, please come here. And he's not going to, react to that. But anyways, so I had to, again, not forcefully, but I had to keep him near me. And he scratched the crap out of me. Like, it wasn't just like a little bit, it was pretty bad. And I felt bad because that was actually, I ended up yelling at him, but it was out of like fear. And I didn't say anything bad, but still I felt really bad. But looking back, I'm like, I think that was an appropriate thing because legitimately I was starting to be attacked. And I didn't, I knew you can't just like run away and completely get away from that because that student needs your supervision. He needs your help. But at the same time, I happened to be alone that day because some people were out. And I think after that happened, another teacher brought like, do you need somebody to call Mr. Feldman? And then I think the behavior specialist had to step in at that point. But I was trying real hard to get that little task done by myself.
Wow. Well, I just want to commend you for doing that work because I personally know that I wouldn't be able to do a job like that. And it sounds like for the most part, probably 90% of the time you had support, you had people helping you, and it sounded like it was mostly a positive experience. So what led you to transition to your third year of teaching in the gifted program?
Oh, yes. Going through school, I had been, or in my county, they have in my county and in the school I went to, they had self-contained gifted classes and through middle school and elementary school. And I loved them. Like they were the best. In high school, when we transitioned to more of the honors AP model, it was still pretty good, but it was nowhere near as like stimulating and interesting as being in a gifted classroom. So I always kind of romanticize that in my head as like that was, like one of the high points of my personal education. And I had been trying to kind of break out of special ed and into just English education because English is my main passion. And I think, again, that's probably because English ties in with everything else. You read a novel and it teaches you about almost anything. So I was like, I would love to do that. And I thought it would be, it's a different type of reward to work with students who can engage on a certain intellectual level with English. And I was like, that would be really fulfilling to be able to do that. And so I had interviewed for an English position at the school I was teaching at. And they'd chosen someone else because it was a couple months before the school year ended. They didn't want to transition things. And I understand that. But then over the summer, there was a job ad for a gifted English teacher. I was like, that was my favorite class. That was my favorite teacher. I was still in contact with that teacher. She had moved up to a high school level. I'm like, I want to be Miss Jacobs, but I want to be me version of Miss Jacobs. So I decided to apply for the position. I was a little surprised I felt really honored when I got the interview. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Just to even get the interview. I was traveling in Europe when I got the news back, and she's like, do you think you could interview tomorrow? Sorry about the short notice. I'm like, that would be fine. I was in Berlin. by the Brandenburg Gate. And I went to the interview, and then they called me back like an hour later and offered me the job. So I was like super excited. And I was like, okay, cool. This is going to be like, very different. I knew, but I figured I would be up for the challenge.
So what was your first indication that things were not quite what you were hoping they would be?
Oh, this is one of the embarrassing things, is that I found out I was pregnant like a couple weeks after I accepted this new job offer. And I was like, oh, darn, like not the best circumstances, because these people don't know me. They don't really care about me. I know it's an inconvenience to walk into a job and be like, hi, I'm Kristen. I'm going to be a real dedicated employee, but I got to take a maternity leave in a few months, not a few months, but like several months. But what could I do? And also, it was my first pregnancy, so I didn't know a lot about what to do. And I was very concerned about getting myself into a doctor's office. And especially because I also have diabetes. So I was like, people are telling me that this is like a very important thing to start getting the care that I need, right? And that the baby's gonna need. So I took a couple tries. I found a doctor that would accept me, because apparently most obstetricians won't work with pregnant diabetics. And I had an appointment, but unfortunately that appointment was like the only one they had for months. And it was during teacher planning week, like the middle of the day. So not ideal, but in my head I was like, well, I've been to 2 teacher planning weeks. I know that they usually have things going on, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem for me to walk away for an hour and a half. Unfortunately, the time that it was scheduled for was also like the open house day that they were having it during teacher planning week. And initially I emailed an administrator who had been more in contact with me than the others. And I was like, I have a doctor's appointment I have scheduled for this day. This was like maybe a week beforehand. Is it possible for me to step out from this time to that time? I'd be back before the school day ended, whatever. That administrator did not respond to me, but the head principal did. A kind of not very kind email. She wasn't a very kind lady, as I'll talk about. But this was like the first thing I think that maybe got me on her bad side. Is that like, she was like, it's unacceptable for you to miss any part of this open house, especially as the teacher of gifted English 7th grade. These parents are very involved. They're going to expect that you're there. I expect that you will be there for the full duration. So I was like kind of taken aback, because it wasn't just like, do you think there's any chance you could reschedule that? Because it's really important to our families that you're there. It's more like, I expect you to be there and that's it. Which, okay, like, she's in charge, but at the same time, me being scared and emotional and all that, it was like, what do you, like, and I couldn't tell her, like, I'm pregnant, I need to go. I couldn't tell her then, because I was very early. I think maybe that one attempt of me to, like, not get that function that was a lot more important to her than I initially anticipated, I guess, maybe put me on her radar. I don't know.
Wow. So did you end up just canceling the appointment and going ahead to open house?
Yeah, I did. Because I didn't see a way around it. Because like I said, I wasn't ready to be like, well, administrator, you don't understand. I'm 7 weeks pregnant and high risk and all this. And like, but I did send not a nasty email. Nasty for me, but what that really means just like, okay, I can see that this like isn't going to work for you or something. Like usually I'd be like, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize blah, blah, blah. But like, I was really mad. But the email itself wasn't like disrespectful. But for me, I guess it is. It's my version of disrespect.
I totally
understand. I was like, what am I supposed to do? But I did end up getting, an appointment rescheduled, and I was at the open house. Things, in my opinion, and this is one of the embarrassing things too, I thought things were going okay. Like, until about 2 months in, when the woman that I'd been paired with as a mentor, or she was my mentor, I was a mentee, I should say. I went to meet with her, and like her immediate face was like, we have to talk. And I'm like, just like out of the blue, that's like, what do you mean things aren't going well? Like, I thought things were okay. And I will say from there, they got worse. And I don't know, I think that might partially just been because suddenly I was scared. And it also might have been what was maybe building up that I didn't see. Being in that environment, I didn't have maybe the like comprehensive vision of what maybe the school year behavior is supposed to start off like. And I'm not saying things were like totally out of control at that point or anything. But, you know, perhaps there was something that other people could see and I just didn't know, because that was the first time I'd been in the classroom of 28 to 32 kids with normal cognitive abilities who can talk if they want to and, you know, mess around in different ways that my other students just couldn't.
Wow. Well, you're kind of reminding me, it's so interesting. We have so many parallels because my nightmare year was in my third year of teaching. And I feel like the transition was similar because I had started out the first 2 years in an inner city charter school teaching fourth graders. And then I jumped to a super rich private school with very ritzy parents and teaching seventh and eighth grade English and Old Testament. Oh, yeah. And so I know what you mean, because it's so funny. For the first couple of months, I thought everything was fine too, until I started getting crazy emails from people. And then I realized like, oh no, like I have lost command of the ship and I thought I was doing so well. So I can totally relate to just that feeling. So what were the students like? Did they kind of match what you pictured, or were they not quite what you were imagining?
No, you know, they weren't quite what I was imagining. Because when I had been in my first position for those first 2 years, during that second year, I did request to go like observe students in different English classes and social studies class once. I did some like practice lessons because I had connections with some of the teachers still, because some of them were my teachers. But in those environments, I was like, okay, you know, this is, again, that mix of like all ability levels in one class, or almost all ability levels in one classroom. So it's a little bit different. Plus they're high schoolers. And I was, you know, thinking back more on my own experience as a middle schooler, I think. I also probably should mention that the middle school I was teaching at is the middle school I went to. But I think maybe I had too much of that in my head and I didn't really know perhaps what the average 12 and 13-year-old was like in a large group. I mean, you see them on the streets and stuff and you know that they can be annoying. But I remember, you know, we were annoying too, like kids my age sometimes. Yeah, it wasn't what I expected it would be. Partially, I think, due to the like curriculum being imposed on them versus like maybe the quality of what we were doing and the interest level of what we were doing when I was in, you know, English class myself in middle school. And part of it is definitely like the culture of kids, their overall point on the world, but and how they interact with the world, and even like almost their like spiritual realities different. I think the biggest thing that surprised me, and I'm not sure, maybe this is a term that already exists, and if it does exist, I might be using it incorrectly, but this is the word I came up with for it, is they had like absolutely no social consciousness. They had no idea that like their existence could impact someone else. Like, no idea that the way that they carried themselves or what they cared about or what they talked about or how they spoke or who they chose to speak to or speak about would have any impact on anyone else but themselves. And even then, I don't think that they had a lot of like concept of it would impact them. But I remember, like I said, like I know I was like an annoying. Every middle schooler is annoying, at least like 60% of the time, at least, but usually more. But like all throughout my life, but especially in school, I had built up this idea that like, you know, you could look at what your classmates are doing. Maybe what they're doing seems like it's fun because they're misbehaving. But you can kind of look at the teacher or be like, oh man, but how does the teacher feel about like that kid running around and totally not listening? And be like, oh yeah, that's probably kind of bad for them. So maybe I should be nice and not add to the problem. And I feel like I wasn't alone with that. I feel like most of the other students around me, again, even in like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, middle school, high school, I feel like we all typically shared that. Now, some kids just didn't care or didn't like the teacher, so they would go crazy anyways. But I think we all had this idea of like communal shame of like, oh man, too many of us are doing bad things right now. So we really need to back it up because like the teacher's about to cry or something. Or it would be reasonable if the teacher was about to cry, even if they don't look like they're about to cry. And I feel like that's a big part, maybe, of what kept classes kind of orderly throughout my childhood and in adolescence. And I feel like without that, it's super hard, like to get like consistent good results or consistent behavioral results that you want to see out of the kids.
Oh my gosh, yes. You keep going, sorry.
I was going to say, because even if you do work at a school that does have like some of those negative consequences the kids don't want, I feel like they don't have like something in their head that's gauging like, oh, I'm getting closer and closer and closer to that thing I don't want. It's just they go over it and then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, what happened? But again, there's not a lot of retrospection about it. They're just like, well, that's not fair. I'm not allowed to do this thing anymore.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I could say like amen a million times. You described that so well, because it's so hard. Like when I'm trying to explain to people that don't know what like modern students are like, it's so hard to explain it, but you put it into perspective so well. Their group dynamics are so off compared to how it was when we were kids. And you just explain that so perfectly. Like even in kind of challenging schools that I went to, yeah, maybe there was like 2 or 3 kids that were kind of jerks, but the rest of the class had enough, common sense and kindness even to care about the teacher and to be kind of like either looking at them like you're crazy or to at least say, hey, I'm not included. But it feels like these days kids can almost like in unity rile each other up and just completely fly off the handle. And kind of like you said, without any barometer of knowing like this is wrong and trouble is coming my way, like it's like so difficult to contain that. So what did you find yourself kind of trying to do to calm your classes down or to like, get through the lesson? What were some of your approaches like?
I'll have to think about that for a second, because my initial answer to what you're saying is just to kind of state that like once my mentor was like, things are not going so well. One big thing that I did, and also the nice administrators, the supportive administrators I worked with, was try to get me in some of the wonderful behavioral management training courses that the county offered. So I tried all kinds of stuff. Which was always a struggle too, because like you know that you need to be consistent with like what you're trying. So you can't just like try something for 3 days and be like, well, that didn't work at all, and then throw it away in the new thing. But at the same time, when you're trying it for 2-3 weeks and it's not working, that does almost become a time of like, well, we really need to get back on track. So what are we gonna do? What did I do? My initial approach and what I walked into the classroom expecting was that if I was calm and collected and respectful of them, which is something that all those courses tell you, then they're going to respond with some level of respect back, and therefore try to work a little bit harder or overcome their desire to talk to their friend or get out of their seat or whatever it is they want to do. That was my initial approach. And one that I kept, don't get me wrong, I didn't throw that out the window. I know that the basis, even for unruly kids, you still gotta be that calm, collected, kind person, even to people who are being brats. But that was not sufficient. So after that, of course, one of the big takeaways from these courses I was taking was make sure that the kids know the expectations and be very consistent with enforcing them, and be very consistent with the escalation of consequences. I know you talk a lot about PBIS. My school was kind of stuck in the center of starting to transition into that. So we hadn't done away with the idea of, okay, you do this one bad thing is a warning. 2 bad things is a lunch detention. 3 bad things is phone call home. 4 bad things or something really, really bad is a referral. But those were, getting easier and easier for the kids to talk themselves out of to the administrator or discipline assistant, whoever was speaking with them. It was also getting more and more common for the parents to be the ones to step in and be like, why did you do this? When my son says that all he did was get up out of his seat to throw away a paper ball. So those weren't, even with the teacher applying them with fidelity, those weren't as foolproof as they could perhaps be. And then we were also, trying to start incorporating oh, that was really, really great that you didn't talk during that test. Here's a point. We had this app, and I don't remember what it was called because I had my son right before we started implementing it with the students. But we had this app where every student had an account. And, if you noticed that they were really great doing this or did something they do not normally do that was good, you gave them a point or whatever. And then at the end of the quarter, they could trade those points in for some kind of benefit.
So I don't want to rub any parents of gifted kids the wrong way, but I'm going to be honest with my experience with gifted students. A lot of them were really kind of know-it-all and wanting to challenge the teacher and outwit the teacher and debate the teacher. And that's why I kind of can't imagine, especially with middle school gifted kids, teaching them. Did you have that experience, or what was that like?
Just a bit. And you know, that stereotype that you're speaking of, I believe that it's not true 100% of the time, of course, but it certainly can be. And I think that's probably part of the reason why my head principal was like, you need to be there. From what I heard, she pandered a lot to like the wealthier families. And you know, statistically speaking, these wealthier families are going to have kids with slightly higher IQs, and they're going to push to get their kids with slightly IQs like placed in these things. So, but I really only had one like bad experience with that. And even in terms of bad, like it's not as bad as it could have been. And I kind of laugh at it now, but it was very bizarre when it was happening. So one of my particular periods that I had, I think it was my smallest, but they were my most talkative. So the problem with them wasn't that they were just like disobeying or hitting each other. It was just that they would not focus on me talking. They would not focus on whatever assignment we were doing. You know, they would not focus on different methods of engaging them in classwork, like getting up out of the seat, moving to the side room for that. They just wanted to like socialize with each other 100% of the time. And there was one boy in the class, and he was like a nice kid. He wasn't like, seemed well liked by his peers. Like he was polite-ish. I mean, he was never rude. And obviously friendly, because again, he got along with everybody. And so this kid was like one of my daily, like, I need you to please stop talking to the kid next to you. You talk to him again, you know, tomorrow we're going to switch seats. He's talking to the kid next to him because he's getting along with everybody. But eventually it's like, okay, like these things you're doing, they're so little. I know it's not a horrible thing to be friendly. It's not a horrible thing at all to want to talk to the people by you. But the problem is that you're consistently not able to follow expectations, and it's helping derail other people around you. So I need you to stop, and I'm going to give you lunch detention. Now, lunch detention, I'm assuming, just like everywhere, was no real big deal. It's just, okay, one day you can't sit with your friends in the cafeteria. You got to come sit at this other table and not talk. Well, so I wrote this kid a lunch detention, and other students, because he wasn't the only one. And he was upset. So he went home and I get like a message from one of the administrators that the parents want to speak with me. And they're like, you know, do you want me to like be there with you? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Like, I think I can handle this. It'd be different if I was writing like I wanted this kid expelled or something, you know. They'd be like, yes, please back me up. So like, this is a lunch detention. It's going to be fine. And the parents are like on the phone with me, like bargaining about like how our son has always been like an excellent student. He's gotten straight A's his entire school career. You know, he participates in band, and he volunteers at the hospital after school. He does this. And like, we would like to ask you that you take away the lunch detention. And I'm like, you know, I agree. Your son is really nice. He's very bright. He's very smart. You know, he's very kind, and he obviously is very well liked by his peers. But this isn't the first time I had to ask him to stop talking. It's not the second, it's not the third. This has been a problem, and it's not only him, and he's not the only one who got a lunch detention. So I think in this case, it's appropriate that he does this one day of sitting at a separate table, you know, to be fair to his peers too, because it's, you know, it was across the board punishment, not for everybody, but for these like 3 or 4 kids. And they're still bargaining with me, but I'm like, you don't need to worry about this. There's no permanent record of lunch detentions where like next year he's going to try to join NJHS and they're going to say no because you got a lunch detention. It's like, there is literally no repercussion for this beyond one day of him being slightly uncomfortable at lunch. Like, please, like, and they're like, well, we really disagree with your decision. And they like hung up. And then like a couple days later, they sent me like a card, not at my home address, like the school, a card with a $5 iTunes gift card. And I'm not sure if that was like a belated like bribe of theirs. Like I know you said no, but or if they were just being like sarcastic, or it's like a cursed like gift card. I don't know. I never figured it out. Didn't have time because again, I probably like a month later I was giving birth to my son. So
that's intense. So did you have a lot of those kind of micro interactions with parents, or did you feel like the parents kind of left you alone?
Mostly the parents left me alone. I really don't have too many complaints about parents that year. Now, again, maybe things would have gotten worse. The parents kind of left me alone. One thing I did not appreciate and I felt was not helpful is that my head principal had told me, like, in passing, like at some point, I think it was more towards the end of the school year, that like she was getting a lot of emails about me. And I'm like, but about what? Like, 'cause you're not communicating this to me. Like, you're not like not in a mean way, not in a nice way. You're not like, Kristen, I got this email. You're just not telling me. Like, what are they saying? I will say another approach that I tried. Actually, but the parents I contacted, I really didn't have too much problem. And actually some of it was positive because one of the last things I tried before I went into labor was being really, really intentional with contacting parents for good things. Especially with some of the students who I had already, written up or already called before about, hey, your kid just did this. So I implemented this thing where on Fridays, I gave the kids like the choice between, do you want a candy bar? No, not every kid. I think it was like a raffle. You had to they had tickets if they did good things. I would pull one name per week per class. Do you want a little candy bar, or do you want me to call or email your parent and tell them that you did something great this week? So a lot of times the kids would be like, could you email my parent or call my mom or dad because I'm already in trouble or whatever. So I did actually get to have like some nice conversations during that. And kind of, and during that, of course, they're usually like, well, didn't you say before that he's doing something? Like, yeah, but he is like getting a little bit better. So that was actually an effective thing. And I think if I had to be in an environment like that again, God forbid ever, I would probably start something like that from the beginning.
I love that idea. Actually, that is fantastic. Yeah. Wow. So what would you say if there was kind of like an imaginary pie chart of like the hardest things about the job? Like, would you say it was admin, students, parents, or just the overall emotional experience of, being pregnant for the first time and anticipating a baby and all the emotions that come with that?
I think if I had to rate one above the other, I'd say probably admin in that case. Now, granted, well, it's hard to say because if the kids had been little angels 100% of the time, it wouldn't have been an issue that one administrator didn't like me for whatever reasons. But given that the kids were very, very challenging, and that the admin, who first of all was the head principal and second of all was my evaluator, was not supportive in helping me succeed in my role. And not only not supportive, but just kind of seemed to have had her mind made up that I was not a good fit for that position. And I don't really know. It was never really made clear to me about all that. I would have been fine. But this one I got to chalk up to admin because I think I could have came in every day and struggled through, 3 out of 5 classes being a terror. If I could just have took a deep breath and been the people around me know that I'm doing my best. And, there was this victory today. There was that thing that went well. So we'll just keep getting better. But the fact of the matter is that I was trying to measure myself against what I knew this expectation was above me. Whether or not that was realistic or attainable or whatever is another question. But I knew it was there. And I knew I needed to reach it, and I was trying. There was no understanding of the reality of everything. There was no sympathy, or there's no from that one person who mattered the most. There was no support.
Definitely. Did you have instructional coaches that could come in and help, or how did that part work out?
So the teacher who was mentoring me had moved from my position to an English instructional coach position. Wait, no, I'm sorry. She wasn't an instructional coach. She was a testing coordinator, but she had some of those duties as well. And we did have English instructional coaches, or an English instructional coach who would come in and model different, lesson approaches. I also had 2 special education teachers who would come in and support, I think 2 or 3 of the classes once or twice a week. So that could also be helpful in terms of trading off some of the responsibility of leading a lesson or leading a part of a lesson, so that way I could do something else or focus on a different part of the job of teaching, maybe me being more of the observer of what is this kid doing when the video is playing? What is this kid doing when we're supposed to be reading the text? And also, of course, just get their advice about how best to teach a concept, how best to reteach a concept. So there was support like that. And I think, in educational environment that's really, really valuable for both the teacher and the students, because students are going to respond differently to different approaches, different teachers. I will say I don't have a great idea about what would fix the education system. But I think the only solution, like half solution I can come up with, is like almost every class, maybe every class, having that person or the teacher and the support, or two teachers there every day. Like wow. Even the well-behaved classes, it's not even about like behavior management, although that is a huge thing. I just don't see how having 30 kids in a room gives the adults who are supposed to be supporting them and helping them enough time and attention to actually help some of these kids that are struggling succeed, help some of the kids who are succeeding continue to succeed and continue to find motivation. That's the only thing I can think of. Like, it's like the cure-all, and I know it wouldn't cure everything, and I know it's not going to happen.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking about how everything you described is such a modern dilemma, because I think the job of teaching has changed so much with the way students have changed. So I think back in the day, like we were talking about earlier, kids generally knew I have to come to class, I have to sit down, I have to be quiet, I'm responsible for the material the teacher is teaching. And if I don't do this little checklist of things, then I'm going to be in some kind of trouble. But now all of that's just kind of almost blown up. And so kids are kind of either a little bit or completely out of control at any given time. So it's like the teacher is having to manage and juggle so much. And so I think, the job of a teacher is almost completely different than it was 40 years ago, just because of the way the students are coming in. And so I totally agree, like having two adults in the room, one that's doing the main, traditional job of teaching, but maybe another one that is a combination of behavior support and academic support. That would be amazing, because I really think one person is expected to do all three of those things. Are supposed to be differentiating instruction and meeting students on all these different levels and managing behavior and instructing in a really engaging, awesome, shiny, amazing way. And it's just, I think maybe there's 1 in a million teachers that are like that, and they make movies about them like 30 years later. But I just think the average human, it's too much for one person to do. So I just totally agree with everything that you're saying. So did you feel a lot of pressure to pass everybody, or did you find that everybody was more or less doing the work and doing okay after all?
There was a pretty big discrepancy there between my classes. So 3 of them were gifted students. So every student in that classroom, have been identified as gifted. As long as they actually put in some effort to do the work, there was no question of like, oh, I'm sorry, you're just not getting it. They just had to do the work. In my other 2 classes, they were regular ed classes. So, a lot bigger spread of abilities, a lot bigger spread of different learning disabilities as well. So with those students, there was definitely, or with all my students, there was a pressure to like, make sure like your kids are passing. And of course, I never said it that way. Like, you don't fudge the numbers or anything. But if your kids aren't passing, it's because you really suck. Especially with gifted kids. But so I, the end of actually all throughout the term was always stressful, but the end of the quarter was especially stressful, because they would reiterate to us at staff meetings and in emails and stuff like, make sure you give the kid, like, keep the kids up to date, or not up to date, give them a list of the work that they missed. Set up a couple lunches a week where the kids can come and make up some of this work. Communicate with the parents what the kids are missing a couple weeks before the grades are due, so that way they can help pressure the child to complete some of this work too. And like all those things are pretty good things to do, and definitely like necessary. But of course, the kids just end up relying on that, and especially on the idea of print out that work for me again, and then at some point you've given them like 5 worksheets of the same thing. And then they swear up and down that they turned it in because they know they did. It gets really unwieldy. All the half completed paperwork, the totally not completed ones, the one that they claim they turned in. So in that way, we definitely were pressured to make sure that like every kid could at least earn a low C. If I remember, the district was kind of moving towards the policy that a lot of other districts have now, where if a kid turns something in, even if they only did one problem, don't give them a 5%, which is what they would have earned if they got that one problem right out of 40 or whatever. Give them a 59, like the highest F for, turning in that little thing. So, by following that mandate, sure, the kids can earn a high D or a low C for pretty much doing nothing.
So you mentioned to me earlier that the whole third year of teaching kind of had an impact on just your personal life and your health. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that happened and what went on?
Yeah. So, me as a person, I like most people, I don't want to let other people down around me. Like, I want to do good at what I'm doing. I want to be able to do good at what I'm doing. And the vast majority of the time, I'll put in the effort needed to do well. And usually that pays off. So when I, again, walked into the campus that one day, like a month and a half into my job as a middle school gifted teacher, and suddenly found that I wasn't up to par, that was like very scary and like upsetting. But I'm like, okay, like, what are they suggesting? Like, we can still do this, no problem. And the fact that, or it quickly became very central to like my overall life, that I improved that aspect of myself. Not only because it was my job, but also because I do believe that teaching is incredibly valuable and important, and that education is incredibly valuable and important. I believe that for the high-level gifted kids who would probably teach themselves anyways, even if everyone left them alone. And I believe that, of course, for the students who really, really need one-on-one help to keep advancing in concepts. So the fact that like walk in and suddenly realize that like I was not doing that well really felt awful, because it wasn't just me being like, oh, I'm embarrassed, I suck at this job. It was, I'm embarrassed, I'm bad, but I'm even more embarrassed because these kids are counting on me. These parents are counting on me to make sure their kids get better or keep improving or whatever. My coworkers are counting on me to make sure that I teach these kids English, so that way when they assign an essay in science, they know what to do. And that way, when they come from my class, they're already in a mode of like, oh, I'm supposed to be working, not goofing off. Every period became like, did I do any better? Did I do any better? And the signs most of the time were no, at least from like my own perspective of like, because, okay, how many times did a kid disrupt the class? 15, 20. Okay, that's no better than yesterday. Like, that's still bad. And then of course you have the other metrics like, well, we did just have the district checks, and my kids did score, at least within the guidelines that they want us to have. But it never was clearly good enough. And again, I felt just so guilty and bad for like being stuck in this position where it's like, I know I'm failing your kids and I don't know what to do, and I'm trying so hard. And hoping still that you can turn that around, especially since like I was supposed to give birth in March. So I was like, best case scenario, I have until March, and then I'm gonna have to hand this class off for the last quarter. So like, if I can be a good teacher for 3/4, or is that 3/4? Yeah, 3/4 of this school year, then then that's great. If I can turn things around in quarter 2, then that's perfect. 3, okay, it's getting better. But that's all the time I had to like kind of prove to myself, my coworkers maybe, and my principal, that I could do it. Now I will say my coworkers were not like unkind. It's not like they were like, oh, you're not good at what you're doing. They were always trying to be supportive and stuff. But that's just them being kind. So at the time too, it's like, I don't know whether I can trust like that their judgment of like, no, you did good and that was good. And it's like, it was hard to know who to trust, like including myself. And then also knowing that I was gonna be bringing a kid into this world, and I couldn't get, a group of 12 and 13-year-olds to pay attention to me, to listen to me, to think that what I was saying was valuable or of use to them. I was really nervous. Like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to teach one of my children to behave? How am I going to teach one of my children to care about something important I'm trying to like instill within them or tell them? So that made me a little bit nervous about that part of parenting as well, which, I'm sure that's going to remain a constant, but it's not as bad as my brain was making it back then. So I just felt like an all around like failure, but I couldn't stay there because I knew I couldn't just come in and be defeated. Like I had to like every class period had to be like, okay, that was really rough, but this one could be better. And I would end, it was hard. Like towards like the last month or two, every day when the kids left, because sixth period was also my worst class, of course, as they usually are. By the time like the kids all left, I was like crying and trying to do work and like trying to grade. And I'd try to stop crying to get to my car, start crying again in the car. I would go home. I would have nightmares about just like trying to stand up in front of a group of, there's always kids, stand up in front of a group of kids and like talk, and like I couldn't hear my own voice. No one is like looking at me. No one sees me up there, like, you know, saying anything. Which is such a silly thing, like, you know, to hear about. It's just like, that doesn't sound like it's such a bad dream. But it was like so tied in with this idea of like, what kind of impact can I have on people at all? Because whatever I do, I want to be able to help people. And again, I think that's one of the best parts about being an educator. To me, that's one of the most valuable things that like my teachers did. Not necessarily be a therapist, although that's a very important job as well. But just like a role model and like, you know, someone who's able to and willing to share things about life. And I felt like I was failing at that as a job, but also like failing at that as like a person. Like I felt like I could walk away from teaching and still like be ineffective, nothing, like, you know. And I was also terrified too, because I was not enjoying teaching, of course. It's not like I was like, oh, I love this job, but it's so hard. Like at that point, it's like, this is awful. But what else could I do? Because again, you know, I graduated on time with 170 credits instead of 120. So, you know, that's like a lot of stuff, but I didn't have, you know, another clear idea of what I could do. I was going to have a kid. I couldn't just be like, well, I'll just go back to school and take out more student loans and become a pharmacist or something, you know? So I was also like, not only do I stink at this job, not only do I stink overall, I have no idea what I'm going to do to support this kid that I'm going to have like next year. In the meantime, I'm just going to wake up to this like horrible reality every day until I have my baby, and then I can take a break for a little while.
Thank you so much for sharing so honestly. And I just want to affirm that I think your experience is so normal. I still actually have nightmares of being a teacher. I think I actually had one maybe like a few weeks ago. And it's just, I think it really is something that gets in your psyche. And you're so right. That sense of failure really does permeate every aspect of your life if you're a conscientious person that cares and wants to do well. And I still remember like it was yesterday, my nightmare third year teaching. Like I was trying to apply for jobs and I would just start bawling because I felt so worthless and so beaten down after that experience. So I'm just really glad that, you know, that you're being so honest, because I think that it'll take the weight off of so many teachers' shoulders, and they can think, you know, maybe I'm not the one that sucks. Maybe this system sucks. And I just kind of think, you know, whenever we take all the pressure off of students, it has to go somewhere. And the parents don't want to take it. The admin doesn't want to take it. The district doesn't want to take it. So there's one vulnerable person that normally really cares and has a big heart and is willing to be self-reflective. And those are teachers, and all of those expectations that used to be shared with all of these people are now dumped on one individual. And I just think that that is why half of all teachers are quitting in the first 5 years, because, you know, you can only beat yourself up so much. You can only question yourself so much. You can only have so many nasty parent emails and mean admin things before it starts eating you from the inside out. And like, I just can relate so much with everything you said. And so thank you so much for sharing. So let's kind of talk about life after the nightmare year of teaching. Did things get better for you? What was that like?
Well, I'm going to start by just wrapping up my nightmare year of teaching. Sure. So I ended up giving birth to my son 3 months early. And that put me in like an unexpected place in terms of my job, because of course the plan was always like, well, we find the replacement for Kristen in March or February or whatever. And all of a sudden it was the week before, I think before Christmas break. And it's like, okay, well, you know, is Kristen going to be, or is she going to come back? And, you know, I had no preterm baby 12 weeks early. The doctors were like, well, you know, he'll probably be in the hospital till his due date, but you never really know. And I didn't want to, you know, take the leave that I was planning to take when my son was sitting in an incubator. Like, I mean, there's value to that, to being able to sit in his room for 24 hours a day. I knew I could go sit with him a few hours a day after work. And I wanted to be able to actually have that time that I envisioned in terms of him being home and me being able to take care of him for a little while and then finding childcare. So I remember communicating with my head principal that like, you know, first of all, that I was in the hospital. Second of all, that I had my son. And then she's very like kind of gruff lady, not nice at all. But I mean, some gruff people are nice. She is not. But like her first thing was just like, when will you be coming back? Because I need to plan for this. And I was like, again, okay, I understand. You do need to plan for that. I am not sure. The doctors are telling me this, blah, blah, blah. Well, give me some kind of time because I know about preterm babies. Like my sister-in-law had twins early. So, you know, like I know what it's like, but still you need to tell me. And I'm like, well, obviously you don't, but okay. I told her that I think I told her I'd give her an update and I was going to try to see what my doctor would do because I told her I wanted to come back when my son was in the hospital. And the next week or whatever, I went to the doctor like 6 days after delivery. And the doctor approved me to go back. She begrudgingly approved me to go back immediately because I was like, please, like, don't make me stay at home for 12 weeks like now and then have to work when my son is like, you know, out. So I went back to work, but I made the mistake, I guess, of telling my team members before I sent the email to my boss. So I'm like, I'm going to come back. And they're like, yay. And then like my boss emails me and is like, tells me that I'm very unprofessional with communication, that I did not inform her that I was planning on coming back. This was like putting a wrench in her plans that she had already made. Now she needed to figure out what to do with me. I was like, wow, okay. But what they ended up doing, and the reason why I tell you all that is because when I went back, they placed me in the learning lab to help students with credit recovery. And actually that was, I was very embarrassed. Like walking through the campus, I felt like everyone knew that I had been like demoted from like a position of respect to one of like, oh, your job doesn't matter at all. Like, because it wasn't 100% necessary that I was there. It was useful for the students. And I tried to be useful, of course, because these are students who are behind. So they legitimately do need help completing this online work that they're being assigned for credit recovery. But, you know, I was embarrassed. Like, I was like, man, everyone must know that I just was so bad that the principal was happy to put a new teacher in my place and put me in the corner. But it was actually the nicest thing that lady had ever did for me because it was a totally non-stress job. I just showed up. I helped the kids. I tried to ask if there was any other way I could be helpful. There was never any other responsibilities given to me. But it opened up the door for the next year for my next job, which was... I realized like, well, one of the things that worked for me with special education is that, first of all, there's always at least 2 adults in the room. So behaviors are not as bad. And you got a support person there. And for 2, I'm not incredibly charismatic, unfortunately. Smaller groups are better for me in terms of like, who's going to sit down and listen and get something from what I'm saying. And so in that learning lab, you know, I got to work with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids at a time tops. And it was nice. And, you know, and I feel like it made at least a small difference in that quarter I was there. So after that, I was like, well, you know what, in terms of things that are available to me in the education world, because I was still like, I have no idea what other job I can have. Like, especially one that's going to pay anything above, you know, $15 an hour, which, so I was like, I probably have to stick with education maybe and just try to find something that'll work a bit better. So I got a position as a push-in special education teacher in a general ed classroom. And that was at a different school. And like starting off that year, I was still very embarrassed because like I had on my record, you know, my evaluations. Year 1, you know, excellent. Year 2, excellent. Year 3, like did not meet expectations or whatever. And worst of all, in that like evaluation, my principal lied and said that like she had tried to set up multiple meetings with me, talk about my performance, and I had declined all of them. But the thing is that like I had tried to set up 3 meetings with her at the end of the school year to talk about what she felt I could improve or what she felt I should be doing in education if I stayed. And she missed all those meetings and never rescheduled them. I had to keep like trying to get a hold of her, and then the school year just ended. So I'm like, well, whatever. But anyways, I was walking around with what I felt was like a scarlet like F for like failure. And I'm like, gosh, like, you know, the administrators here probably have no expectations for me because my last evaluation just pretty much said not only was I not good, I didn't care enough to try to be good. So my first like half a year there, I was very scared that first of all, something bad might happen again, but also just that like maybe people around me were like looking at me like I was already a failure. No, that's not at all what happened. I was worried about that for a while. But as the year went on and I started to realize like, this is okay. Like there's a lot of problems at the school I taught at. And I hate to say this because it feels so wrong for me to say I just kind of copped out, but I did. As a special education pushing teacher in my county, at least at that school, the hardest parts of teaching were no longer 100, they weren't on me anymore. So I would try to help with them because I knew my classroom teacher still had to worry about, oh, that kid keeps acting up and these, like, my class is out of control. I knew that they were worried about that. And I was worried about it too. But it was no longer like, oh, I'm worried the admin is going to like say that I'm the one who's failing. And so I want to lend a hand with that. I want to be that second person in the room to, again, help with academics, but also just be like, hey, like, you need to, because teacher is talking, or like, this is important, like, or just like, or take the kid outside of the room if they're acting foolishly, like, whatever. I wanted to be able to do that to make things better for my teachers, but also make it a better learning environment so that more of the kids, including the ones that I was tasked with helping, could be successful. And that was like, doing that took away all or almost all of the problems with teaching. So I hate to say that because, again, I know it's such a huge thing. It's not like, oh, I don't have to face it, so therefore it's not a problem. I know it's a big problem. And I would talk to my coworkers and hear about it. But for me, in my own little bubble, it was like the perfect thing, like low stress. Of course, as a special education teacher, I just speak more with parents. But like, my unique perspective as the not classroom teacher usually meant that they were more open to working with me. And again, also these kids that I had to work with, because I got to work with them more one-on-one, might have a more friendly response to me than they might to other teachers. So yeah, that, like, all I needed to do to like show competency with that was be able to work with the kids, get their respect a little bit, help them out with academics, support the teacher, do some paperwork. Like, I was made for that almost.
That's awesome. You deserved that after that nightmare that you had your third year. So I'm like so glad that you got to have like some rewarding part of education that felt like a good fit. So did you get better evaluations after the nightmare year?
Yeah, my evaluations went back up. And I started again. And I think what was so great about that, like, if I had walked away from teaching entirely that year, I might still be a little bit more bothered about that year. Well, I definitely would be. But one thing I think that would still bother me about that is that I think I would still probably retain that feeling of like, I can't help people, even if I want to. They're not going to listen. Like, they don't care. Like, it's just me that I'm an invisible, like, I don't know. But my last 2 years of teaching gave me back some of that like self-conception of like I can help people at least a little bit. Yeah. So it was very rewarding and good for me to be able to redeem myself a bit in my own eyes in that regard.
That's so good. I feel relief even just hearing that part of your story. I'm like, oh, because I just want to like give you a hug. And just all the things you express, I think, is so relatable to most teachers, even if they don't have dramatic experiences. I just think the new form of education that's so focused on like judging and rating teachers and data points and just all that pressure, I think you have to be made out of steel to not let that, get in your mind. And just like you expressed, sometimes even when people are saying you're doing good, it can even make you second guess. Because I know that with the exception of my third year teaching, I almost always got good reviews, but it was just always that stress hanging over my head of like, what if an admin comes in and like a kid is putting their head down and going to sleep, or somebody's drawing? It's like crazy making. So I'm so glad you were able to find a good role in education. So eventually you transitioned to a brand new role in education. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So as I said, like the last job as a teacher I had was perfect. I could have kept doing that forever, and it would have been fulfilling enough. And if nothing else changed, I would have been okay. And again, I hate saying that because I know how bad it is for the classroom teachers. And but I could have kept rolling merrily along for who knows how long. But one of the aspects of or one of the problems of education, or public education and private, I guess, is salaries. And I was beginning to realize that, in my area, a teacher salary is not cutting it. And I knew that I needed to find something that had more potential for me to make more money, at least at some point in the future, even if not immediately. And what I kind of decided upon, because of the ease of training available and also the support of some friends in the industry, was web development. So one of the summers, or last summer, I took the whole time to complete a web development bootcamp online. And I started looking for web development jobs. And as I've said a million times, I'm not like, I would be happy doing a bunch of different things, but I did want to stay in some area that I believed in. Like I wanted to work for a company that I believed in, or a cause I believed in, or to do something that really felt like it brought some value to the world beyond just like, oh, look, this is a new thing to buy, or like, this is an entertaining pastime. I don't know. And I started gravitating towards looking at what colleges were offering in terms of IT roles and web developer roles. So I live fairly near to Tampa, and eventually one of the community colleges in Tampa was hiring a web developer. And I applied for that and went through all the routine of answering a bunch of questions about like, why did you decide to leave teaching? It's like, well, I don't really want to. There's a lot of things about it I like, but I want to keep doing something I love, and I money. And also I wanted to do something that, again, allows me to kind of learn all kinds of new things. And really web development does allow for that. Not so much on the humanities side, which is sad, but I still have lots of free time, so I can keep learning about how history fits in with everything, and new novels and all that. But it gives a lot of freedom to learn about new technologies and how they're impacting the world in all these different ways. So it seemed like a good fit for me. And so far it has been. I will say that in terms of like my day-to-day, like, did I do something good today? It's not as high as it was when I was a teacher, because it was always really rewarding to sit down with a kid, and especially a kid who's used to like academic failure, and be able to sit down with them and try to work with them on something, and then like they get it, or they get a part of it, or they at least start to feel better about themselves and have more confidence the next time they get it. Those were super rewarding times that like I felt like I was doing good things. And there's not as many of those with web development, just because, you don't work as closely with other people. I do feel good supporting education in general, especially education for what is usually more disadvantaged populations. The community college population is usually more untraditional students or lower income students. So knowing that I'm playing a small role in keeping like that whole thing rolling for them, even behind the scenes, is enough.
Awesome. So you sound like you're happier. Do you feel like you're happier overall in this new role, or are you missing teaching a little bit ever?
I do miss teaching a bit. And again, that is almost purely because the worst parts of it were never my sole responsibility. And also because, teachers, especially special ed teachers, when you don't need to be stuck in one classroom all day, you get to kind of talk with a lot of different people. So it's a little bit more social than my current role as well, especially since I'm one nice thing about this job, or the web development job, is that I get to work from home for 4 out of 5 days. So that's been really, really, really convenient, especially because I'm pregnant again and I've got all these doctor's appointments, and it's hard to get up and down and all this. But at the same time, I don't get to interact with as many people, both the kids and the teachers. Sometimes the kids are nice to interact with. Sometimes.
Well, I'm kind of curious, like, how hard was it to pick up web development? Because because I'm not super techie, that sounds kind of intimidating, but did you feel like you picked it up pretty easy?
No, I don't feel like that. And I think part of it might be because I respond really well to the traditional educational model, or at least the traditional one that was when I was growing up. But I never struggled with learning anything if it was set out in like that way, and taking all the tests and then applying a little bit, no problem. The web development bootcamp, and also I feel like the approach of becoming a web developer without going to get the computer science major or degree, is a lot more, or it's different, and it's very effective for a lot of people. But for me, it involves a little bit more effort. So I still feel like there's so much that, of course, there's a lot I need to learn, because I'm pretty new to this. This is only 6 months of working as a web developer, and it's about a year since I started learning. But I know there's a lot of gaps, but I also feel like it's not my number. Like, I am not out of the box like computer genius either. Of course, I utilized it tons as a teacher, or utilize computers tons as a teacher, of course. Every teacher does. But no, there's a lot of room for improvement. And I'm actually trying to work my way towards being able to study it academically and seriously. So my hope is to get some prerequisite classes done at the community college I work at, and then eventually maybe enter a master's degree program for computer science, so that way I can satisfy myself in terms of knowing the background of what I'm doing, and also, of course, continue to do well in this job and maybe do so a little bit quicker.
That's awesome. Well, you're really inspiring because, you stepped out and you got out of your comfort zone and you're learning and you're in a better position. And that's all like so encouraging. And I'm kind of curious, like, how would you encourage a teacher or an educator that is just kind of in the classroom or doing something within the school building and they just feel stressed and they feel like it's eating them alive and they're feeling like worried or scared to kind of get out of the education box? Like, how would you encourage them or what advice would you give them?
So I think that would probably vary based on the individual I was talking to, but I'm specifically thinking about one teacher that I worked with this past year. She reminded me so much of me during my nightmare year. It was her first year teaching high school, and she was facing a ton of the problems I was having, except for the fact that none of the administrators were looking at her with like blame in terms of like, you should be doing better. They're all like, oh, you're doing great. And she was doing real great. It's the kids. And it's the fact that there's 30 kids and 20 of them have behavior issues, But she would, she had started to have the same like worries and conception about herself that I did in terms of like, what is my purpose here if I cannot help these kids, if I cannot get these kids to listen to me? Can I get anyone? Can I help anyone? And I know she has the same kind of aspirations. And I think in her case, before I say that, I've heard that she's accepted a position as an elementary school teacher next year, which I think will be great for her because she is a very good teacher. I think she just maybe elementary school would be slightly better. They're not. I assume they're not as vicious in elementary school. I was never brave enough to do elementary school. But so for someone like her, I was really just trying to like help her reframe what was going on around her as like, remember, this is, first of all, like, this isn't your fault. Second of all, the most any of us expect you to do here is, of course, do your job, but just get through the day. Like, and rely on the people who are there to help you. Like, tell the behavior specialist that like your period 3 keeps doing this and this and this. Ask them what they think. See if they'll offer some support of some kind. Tell me that you really need my help when we do essays or whatever, because that half the class is going to just mess around on the computers. Like, tell the teacher next to you that there's this one kid who is like causing a disruption. Can you send them to their classroom during their planning or something? So whatever support you can get, like seek it out and make use of it. I also, and as much as you can, don't let the fears you have regarding what's going on in your classroom impact your conception of who you are and what your abilities are. Try to remember the good times through the bad. And also, I guess, find like a trusted expert around you, someone that you can trust to like gently but truthfully tell you if there's something that's going on that shouldn't be going on, or like something that like truly is an issue. Like, yeah, if 30% of your kids didn't turn in your essay, of course that's not great. That's not necessarily your fault. Of course it's not great, but is that like really like, oh wow, like usually only 5% of kids don't, so I think you need to improve on something? Or is that really just like, you did your best? And I like watching your videos because the people you bring on have these really intelligent, good ideas about how these things can be fixed, and I just haven't come up with them. Again, my only thing is like, maybe if there's more teachers in the room, we could get the kids to work more consistently. But like, yeah, I don't know how to fix those problems. But I think trying to give people coping mechanisms, if you're in a bad teaching position and you have support, like if the admin is against you, I don't know, just leave. Like, make your life better. But if no one is breathing down your neck but yourself, I would say, try to reframe it mentally. Keep doing the things that like calm you down outside of school. Don't make your entire identity during this time the fact that you're a teacher, a good one or a bad one. And then maybe rethink about what position you might want for the next year, if you're interested in staying in education, which this woman was, and I was as well in a lot of ways, because there might be a position that takes away some of that stress, but still allows for like the nice high points, like being able to positively impact the kid's life or be a positive role model.
Awesome. Well, you did great. I think you gave amazing advice, and I'm just so appreciative of your vulnerability. I know it's going to touch a lot of people. So thank you so much, Kristen, for coming on. And for my audience, let us know what you think in the comment section. If you have any video ideas, let me know. If you want to be interviewed, you can email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. And we'll see all of you guys next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.